All right, Oliveira Lawyers. This is Luciano Oliveira. Today is January the 5th. Well, it's a Sunday. Now it's 3:32 Rio de Janeiro time. We're starting one more live stream. I'm using a portable setup. So you guys let me know if you can hear me, if you can see me okay, if the streaming is working fine on your end. I hope to see our friends as usual. And let's get started. So just as always, we have a Bill over here. Bill says, Oi Luciano, feliz ano novo. Happy New Year to you, Bill. I hope you had a great New Year's Eve. And pretty happy to see you over here. And I assume, Bill, like everything is working fine on our live stream. You can hear me well, you can see me too. Let me know. This is a portable setup, and hopefully everything is gonna go well. But sharing about the latest ongoing activities here at the firm, it remains a lot of real estate activity. You know, the US dollar currency against the Brazilian real remains pretty strong. So not surprisingly, many people wanting to buy real estate in Brazil. We have Krishna, Diamiso, Feliz Ano Novo, Krishna. Happy New Year to you as well. And remember, if you are here live with us, you have a priority in terms of suggesting a topic of your interest, to be discussed here live. If it is like a generic topic, I can certainly address those topics freely and discuss as much as needed. And if it is a legal topic, sometimes I may have some restrictions on how far I can go with my analysis because of the constraints by the Brazilian Bar Association. The Brazilian Bar Association does not allow us to provide free advisory. So in theory, we can discuss a topic to a certain extent, but let's say we cannot get to the point in which it would become like almost like a personal consultation. So I hope that makes sense. All right, since we don't have any topics so far, let's see one of our topics in our backlog. We have feedback from Bill. Yes, always great, but YouTube will not let me respond too fast. That's good to know, Bill. Maybe there is a delay. In terms of the messages you can send. That's something we can take a look into it. So nice sharing, Bill, as always. All right, so let's take a look at another question over here. Okay, this question is somewhat common. I was married to a Brazilian, and now my wife, my former wife, she's saying that we needed to have our divorce done in Brazil as well. It does not make sense to me because our divorce in the United States was fully completed. Why would I have it to be divorced? Why would I need a divorce in Brazil as well? And she says it's going to cost us money and it may take over a year. Is that true or not? All right. So yes, this is like, you know, a kind of new to foreign citizens, particularly in the U.S. And like I say, you know, like in Brazil, we have some additional red tape and bureaucracy. And so if you have a divorce done in the United States, and if you have a Brazilian spouse, the Brazilian spouse will have the obligation, right? Like, so it's mandatory, it's not optional. The Brazilian spouse or former spouse will have to do what we call technically an homologation of the divorce in Brazil. And the concept behind this homologation process goes like this. Brazil has a specific, of course, specific law and specific regulations to the dissolution of a marriage, meaning that Brazil may choose not to validate the divorce that took place in the United States entirely. In other words, Brazil is going to review the decision by a U.S. court to make sure that such a decision is compliant with the Brazilian laws. Now, another element for you to understand this need is because many times, these couples with different nationalities, they are going to have assets in different countries. So let's assume this couple with a U.S. citizen and a Brazilian citizen, they have properties in the United States and properties in Brazil. So if there is a divorce, properties in the United States naturally they are going to be distributed according to the laws of the United States, but not necessarily it's going to be the same case with the Brazilian real estate. So because of such concern, Brazil is going to say, all right, like I understand you had a divorce in the United States, but now we're going to review all the details of such a divorce, and then we're going to either homologate it in full, meaning that whatever was decided in the United States is going to remain just as is, or we're going to do some type of review or revision of such divorce decision to make sure that the decision is fair from the Brazilian perspective, right? So this is very important when the couple has property in Brazil, or maybe it has child support to be paid in Brazil, because again, the Brazilian courts, they are going to kind of validate, or if not validated in full, they are going to revise some aspects of such divorce. And again, for the U.S. citizens, it's not mandatory for them to participate in the homologation, but for the Brazilian spouse, they are required to have such homologation. Otherwise, the Brazilian spouse cannot remarry, and the Brazilian spouse would, to a certain extent, be considered as still married, right? So because of this aspect, every time we have such homologation procedures here at the firm, it's not that difficult to convince the U.S. person to assist or to agree with the homologation, because this would, from a certain level, have an impact on the U.S. person as well. So up to today, and we had several homologation procedures here at the firm, we never had a U.S. citizen who would say, well, I don't care, I'm not going to participate, not my problem. The opposite, most of them would be pretty happy, say, listen, I understand, I want this thing to be over as well, so no worries with me agreeing to the process of homologating the divorce procedure. All right, so I hope that was helpful. We have a Bill, where would be the best place to visit for the first time coming to Brazil? All right, Bill, so that's a great question. In terms of visiting Brazil for the first time, the two main points of entry in Brazil are going to be São Paulo and Rio de Janeiro. Okay, and the cost of a ticket from the U.S. to Brazil for a flight is going to vary substantially depending on your route. And from that perspective, I think, as long as you don't have a personal preference, right? Like some people, they are going to come to Brazil and they will want to visit a specific place such as the Amazon or the Pantanal, or the Iguazu Falls or Rio de Janeiro, right? If you have such a specific desire, then I think it makes sense for you to definitely include those places in your itinerary. But if you don't have, if you wanna try out Brazil I would say usually São Paulo and Rio de Janeiro, they are going to be my standard recommendation, just because you're going to be able to spend considerably less. And if you fly into São Paulo, that's where you're going to get like the best prices usually, particularly if you're coming from states such as New York, Florida, New Jersey, states in which there is a large Brazilian population. And from São Paulo, you can easily fly to Rio de Janeiro, or you could even drive to Rio de Janeiro. Like you could drive, to drive from São Paulo to Rio, it takes you around 5 hours. So usually São Paulo and Rio de Janeiro are going to be my top picks, Bill. Now, of course, there is so much more to Brazil than just São Paulo and Rio de Janeiro. Florianópolis is another recurring destination for foreign citizens in Brazil. Believe it or not, like in terms of real estate acquisition, Florianópolis and Santa Catarina in general is currently, at least here at the firm, is currently ahead of São Paulo. And look, we have a lot of activity in São Paulo, right? But like Rio de Janeiro is like the forever number one when it comes to real estate transactions. São Paulo is naturally like a second, but at least for the last few months, like Florianópolis and the state of Santa Catarina in general, they are ahead of São Paulo, right? So I'm just mentioning real estate because it's something that we track very closely here at the firm. And it does show that Brazil is much more than just São Paulo and Rio de Janeiro. And as I like to share over here, I particularly like the northeast of Brazil a lot. Cost-wise, in the northeast, it does represent a better deal than São Paulo and Rio de Janeiro. So if you think it is true, or if you're going to spend more than a couple of weeks in Brazil, even if you're paying a higher fare to travel to Brazil or to the northeast of Brazil, at the end of the day, it may be more cost effective, because even though you're paying more to get there, once you're there, you're going to be paying less, like for meals, for lodging, for car rental. Everything in the Northeast is going to be more affordable than it is in São Paulo, Rio de Janeiro, and Florianópolis, for that matter, right? So I think that the duration of your stay in Brazil is also going to help you. Plan accordingly, Bill. But as usual, like Brazil is an experience that grows with time, and I can tell that like different people are going to have a different tastes in terms of geography. Like there is so much randomness in terms of the experiences you're going to have in Brazil, Bill. But one thing I can tell you for sure, once you try out, you're going to love it, and you're going to be coming often to Brazil, and maybe even to stay for good. All right, Bill? Good question. All right, we have Moses. Moses Travels. Boa tarde. Nice to have you today, sir. Same here, Moses. My question is long. I will send it in 2 messages. All right, Moses. Waiting for your messages. Krishna is sharing with us. I was talking with some friends, and one mentioned that whether you are a student or on a digital nomad visa or a retiree, if you have lived in Brazil for 2+ years, paid taxes, rents, you have contributed to the Brazilian economy, and can make a claim and apply for residency. Is it true? Krishna, so not everything is going to give you a route for you to stay in Brazil as a permanent resident. Okay, so some routes, they are going to allow you to, yes, claim and apply for permanent residency, but not everything. Okay, so the retirement visa or the retirement residency, yes, it's going to give you the opportunity to apply for permanent residency and citizenship down the road. But that's not going to be the case for digital nomad visa, and that's not going to be the case for the student visa. All right. And, like, yes, when you are in Brazil, you have the expectation that you're going to be paying taxes, you're going to be paying rent, you're going to be contributing to the Brazilian economy, but that's not enough. Like, I mean, you need to be in Brazil within a specific track that gives you an option to apply for the permanent residency. And at least as of today, the student or digital nomad routes, they are not suitable for the permanent residency application. Just to share some more light into those tracks that give you access to the permanent residency, you're gonna have, of course, naturally, like the residency by marriage to a Brazilian. You're gonna have the residency by childbirth in Brazil, meaning that if you have a child in Brazil, this child is going to be a Brazilian, and you're going to have access to permanent residency right off the bat. There is the famous, the so-called Brazil Golden Visa. Some people are going to call it the Brazil Viper Visa. And this is going to be the permanent residency by purchase of real estate. Now, the 2+ years is not correct. Usually, you need 4 years. For instance, as a retiree, you actually need 2 years for the retiree, right? Some others are going to be 4 years. Actually, the Viper, the Golden Visa, is like 4 years in Brazil for you to have access to the permanent residency. But the retiree is just 2 years, okay? Digital nomad visa and student, they do not offer you that track. So different types of visas are going to have different benefits and different timelines. Also good to note, Krishna, that all of those things, they are based on regulation. They are not laws, like they are regulation issued by the federal government. And so at the end of the day, there is always some legal support to those things that we answer over here. All right, Krishna, I hope that was helpful. Karina Raidnor, welcome, Karina. Good to see you over here. Karina is asking, how long does it take to renounce Brazilian citizenship? Karina, it's a, when you file for a Brazilian citizenship renunciation, it's going to be an administrative procedure with the federal government. And we can never tell you up front, because this process is not like something standard that you just go ahead and, like file something and 30 days down the road, they are, like approving the application. Usually it does take some, back and forth for them to understand first how you acquired the citizenship, if it was like a citizenship by birth, or if it was a citizenship, by application to an immigration track. So all of those things, they are going to be taken into consideration. We saw some cases being resolved within 6 months to a year, but there are exceptions in which 2 years down the road, the person is still exchanging information with the Brazilian government. And there are cases, like clear-cut cases that could be resolved between 3 months to 6 months. All right, Karina, so these are some numbers for you to consider. I see here Moses is sharing, after purchasing 3 properties in my name in Brazil as a foreign resident, subject to taxation, with rental income from 3 different properties generating $4,000 reais each, totally 12,000 per month. Will I be exempt from paying income tax if I divide the rent between three different members of my family so that each person receives an amount less than 5,000 reais per month. Right, so let's assume you bought three properties, but you have like three beneficiaries. They are receiving, yeah, so there are, you know, like, I mean, I'm probably not going to be able to answer your question directly, Moses, but I can give you a couple of points about taxation in Brazil, more generic ones that may help you, understand the taxation approach in Brazil. So I think the most important one is whether or not you are a tax resident. Okay, so if you bought properties, right? Let's say if you bought properties, which is most of the time the case, like if you bought the properties for the purpose of achieving permanent residency. Once you achieve a permanent residency, that, by the way, is not going to happen right off the bat, but it's going to happen, let's say, once you start on your process, you know, to pursue a permanent residency. This is usually going to happen in 4 years, because let's say you buy a property for 1 million reais. Once you buy the property for 1 million reais, you can apply for the so-called Viper or Golden Visa. And once you achieve this visa or residency, you're gonna get 4 years in Brazil. So for these 4 years in Brazil, you're not gonna be a permanent resident. You're gonna be actually a temporary resident, because again, 4 years is a definite time period, and therefore is not permanent, right? So after these 4 years, then yes, you become a permanent resident. So during the first 4 years, as long as you're not in Brazil for more than 183 days, and as long as you don't do other things that can also attract the tax residency, in this case, you're gonna pay taxes only on the rental that you have or other income that you happen to have in Brazil, because you're not a tax resident, right? So this is scenario A. Scenario B happens when you buy the property. You bought a property for 1 million reais. You get to the 4 years temporary visa, but you stayed for over 183 days. For instance, 184 days. On day 184, you become a tax resident, and then not only the income from your rental in Brazil, but actually your global income throughout the world is going to be taxed, because now you are a tax resident in Brazil. Okay, so this is like the main point, and it is somewhat surprising to us that sometimes, you know, people are, you know, like working to buy a property, to secure the Viper, to secure the Golden Visa, and they don't know what's going to happen from a taxation perspective. But it is like this, right? Like once you achieve the permanent residency, your taxation is going to be on the global income, all right? Now, if you are not a tax resident, let's say you bought one property, you bought two properties, you bought three properties, whether or not for the purpose of the Golden Visa, okay? It could be just for investment. As long as you are not a tax resident, the tax on the rental income should be withheld, meaning that the tenant should not pay you the entire amount. They should pay you the amount that they are going to pay as a rental, less the amount for the taxation that should be actually paid directly to the federal government as your income tax, all right? So from that perspective, right, like I'm not gonna get into the details, but as long as you're doing the taxation correctly, the taxation should be paid directly by the tenant to the federal government. Of course, it would be your job, you know, to find an accountant who's going to be able to tell the tenant, instead of paying the 100%, you're going to pay, and I'm just going to give an example tax bracket, right? But which is kind of common in those circumstances. Tenant, you're going to pay 85% to the landlord, and you're going to pay 15% using this payment coupon, right? Because it's not the tenant's job to figure this stuff out. It's on the landlord, obviously, to direct the tenant to make those payments. And then the tenant would pay 85% to the landlord and 15% directly to the Brazilian Revenue Service. This said, I'm sure there is a ton of people out there who do different types of stuff, right? But this is like the correct approach. If you're not a tax resident, the payment should be done part to the landlord and part to the federal government, because your income tax on rentals should be withheld as per the law. All right, Moses, pretty advanced question, and I hope that was able to help. As usual, I can, shed some light on the topic, but not answer directly the questions, and I hope that was helpful. Krishna, thank you, sir. You're welcome, Krishna. Thank you for showing up and sharing your questions. Thank you, Karina, as well. Thank you, Moses. Thank you, Bill. Good to see you guys over here. I hope you are enjoying our live stream. Don't forget to like our live stream. If you like our live stream, other people just like you who are searching for such content, they are going to find our live stream, and that helps our business as well. So I do appreciate all of you who can like our live stream. All right, let's see if we have any other topics of interest over here. All right, so for the Brazil retirement visa, I still do some work on the job. Should I tell the Brazilian immigration that I work, or should I say that I don't work? All right, so that's a kind of common question, right? Like many people, they're going to schedule a consultation with us just to ask if they can secure the Brazil retirement, either visa or residency, right? Visa, it's when you apply abroad. Residency is when you apply directly in Brazil, pretty much the same thing, just different technical names. And Brazil could not care less if you are working or not. That's not Brazil's business to know if you're working, if you're doing something on the side, right? And I like to tell that I think that from the Brazilian immigration perspective, from the Brazilian government's perspective, everybody should be working or doing something on the side, because if you stop working completely, that's not good for your brain, that's not good for your body. Like, we need to remain active. And Brazil would never have such a requirement to say, listen, if you're doing some work, I don't want you over here, right? So there is no such a thing. The main concern that Brazil has when the Brazilian government says you can have the retirement visa or retirement residency is as long as you have $2,000 in retirement income. And that's pretty clear, and this is going to be interpreted narrowly, okay? So many people, they are going to, receive like a pension, or they are going to receive Social Security, and they are going to remain active working for either an employer, or they're going to be working as a contractor, as under a 1099, or they're going to be working like informally, or they're going to be working on a platform. And it does not matter. The only thing that Brazil is concerned about is that you have the means to remain in Brazil with a secure stream of income. Therefore, you make $2,000 in retirement funds, you're good. You are good to apply for either the Brazil retirement visa or the Brazil retirement residency, all right? To make sure that this is pretty clear. And nowadays, the Brazil retirement track is pretty interesting because just like I think it was Krishna was asking, the retirement track is much better, substantially better than the student, is substantially better than the digital nomad route, because the retirement route is going to give you access to the permanent residency, meaning that, yes, at the beginning you're going to need to renew the Brazil retirement visa residency, but after the second shot, guess what? You're not going to need to renew anything, because you're going to get, as long as you have an immigration firm who's going to assist you in changing to the right track, you're going to be able to achieve the permanent residency. And then with the permanent residency, just like the name says, you could basically remain forever in Brazil without the need to renew anything, okay? And even better, once you have 4 years of permanent residency in Brazil, you also get access to the Brazilian citizenship, as long as you remain as someone with clean criminal records. And on top of that, you also would need to speak and write and understand an advanced level of Portuguese language. And many people, they say, well, I can, get by, I can speak or write some, basic level of Portuguese language, but it's just difficult to me, to learn a more advanced level. You don't need to worry, because again, if you achieve the permanent residency, you basically don't need the citizenship. Of course, the citizenship is even better, because then, it's not like the permanent residency that could be taken away if you do something, like serious, like from a criminal perspective. But again, I mean, if you can live in Brazil as a permanent resident, you're going to have access, to, I would say, the vast majority of things that the Brazilians can do in Brazil. All right. Okay, I see here, Moses, what I want to know is that I can hand over the 2 of the property to different members of my family in order to avoid tax, since an income below 5,000 is not subject to tax. Moses, what you're saying is like you're probably following up on the Brazilian law discussions about tax tax changes that would basically avoid taxation on a certain income level. But this is not like for non-residents, right? So in my understanding, right, and I cannot comment on this piece of you giving access, to the properties, because that could change the nature of the ownership. So it's not just to say, well, give the income to someone, right? I think you would go beyond you just like saying pay to someone else, right? So that would be something to be discussed with a tax attorney to have a very clear answer to those questions. If you can just tell, well, pay a family member of mine, it doesn't sound very straight, to be honest with you, okay? It doesn't sound very straight, but again, you could probably discuss in more details with a tax attorney, right? But something that it looks like pretty clear to me is that if your family members, as you, are not tax residents, okay, whatever you have in income, it should be withheld to be paid according to the special tax bracket that the Brazilian government has for non-residents, right? So this rule that you're mentioning, it sounds to me like something more generic that would be applicable to a Brazilian, right? A Brazilian who lives in Brazil, and if the Brazilian does not make even 5,000 reais a month, I think it makes a lot of sense for the Brazilian government not to charge any taxes, right? 5,000 reais, for those of you who are following our live stream, is less than $1,000. So it sounds to me that is good policy for them to give a tax break to this person. But if the person who owns the property, right, is not a tax resident, is a foreign citizen living outside of Brazil, I don't think it makes any sense to the Brazilian government to give a tax break to this person. all right? That would be my guess. But Moses, again, those taxation subjects, they should be discussed in a consultation with a tax attorney. That's my recommendation to you. All right, Krishna is sharing with us. Sorry, sir, maybe I missed this, but to apply for the retiree track, you have to be a retiree and have a pension, right? Or just need to prove the $2,000 monthly income. No, Krishna, I didn't share that in details, and we can certainly explore more. I can tell you more about that. This is not like like a legal consultation. I'm more like interpreting the requirements from the retirement track, just like as per the regulation. Okay, and the regulation is pretty clear. You must have $2,000 a month of retirement income, and retirement income is narrowly defined, right? What is narrowly defined? It cannot be generic income, okay? So it's just natural that some people, they are gonna think of rental as a retirement income, but in the Brazilian government's understanding, that's not retirement income per se. That could be a complementary type of income for a retiree, but the actual retirement income types are going to be Social Security, are going to be pensions, are going to be 401ks, are going to be traditional or the Roth IRA, okay? And so these are the types of income that the Brazilian government is going to want to see. And again, when you say you need to prove that you are a retiree, right? So the Brazilian government doesn't care your status. Like, they don't want to see someone who's working or who's retiree. They want to see your type of income. Okay, so as long as you have like a pension of $2,000 a month and you are at any age level, you are entitled to apply for the retirement. I'm gonna give you an example. We have like dozens of cases here at the firm. We have like veterans from the U.S. Army in the 30s, in their 40s. We have a new case, like I mentioned to you guys like a few months ago, and we are in the final steps of getting this gentleman approved, and he is in his 20s, right? Now, of course, like when you think about veterans and about the reason why they became entitled, right, to the benefits early on, it's usually because of serious situations that they had at the war front, right? So I don't think anyone would want to be in that type of place, but it is a really nice upside that when you have a retirement early on because of war, kind of disability, you can have access to a place like Brazil, in which if you have $3,000 or $400 or $4,000 of income a month, you can basically live a very good life in Brazil in any city, like even Rio de Janeiro, right? Like, or São Paulo, you can find your place and live a very fulfilling life in Brazil. Okay, Krishna, so just making sure you understand, like the retiree or the income that you need, it gotta be narrowly interpreted, meaning Social Security, pension, disability, 401k, IRA, right? Annuities, it's already a bit of a stretch, but if you have annuities coming, for instance, like from New York Life, like annuities, that can clearly tell that you're going to be paid the income for the remainder of your life, you're good as well. Now, there is not a workaround, but Brazil has a safeguard for those who don't get to the 2,000, but they get closer to the 2,000, right? So Brazil says, for those of you who have like retirement income, the traditional type, narrowly interpret, not enough to meet the $2,000, we're gonna allow you to use another source of income that is passive in nature, but is not necessarily of a retirement. Okay, so what they are saying is, well, listen, maybe you're making $1,500, making you $1,500 a month, and it's closer to 2,000, but it's not 2,000. So in this case, you're gonna use the 1,500 a month from your Social Security, and the 500 gap, we're gonna allow you to use, guess what? Your property rental, right? So property rental is passive, but is not narrowly interpreted as retirement income. But the Brazilian government is gonna say, you know what? It is fine. So now you're gonna show me the 1,500. I still wanna see the 2,000, but what I'm gonna allow you to do is to use the 1,500 that you have from the traditional retirement income, and I'm gonna allow you to meet the gap, to troubleshoot this gap using the property rental, right? And we saw people being able to meet this gap with savings accounts, with investment funds and other types of things. So the idea here is that the Brazilian government doesn't want us to be super strict. The Brazilian government is trying to make it easier for people who do not get to the 2,000, to kind of show, all right, I have a good retirement income, but not enough to meet the 2,000, but I do have other type of income. And when you combine the traditional retirement and the non-traditional passive type of income together, you can meet the 2,000. All right, Krishna. All right, so I hope that was helpful. Krishna says, makes sense. Thank you. Absolutely, Krishna. And following up, when foreigners naturalize a citizen, it is easy for them not to do the military service. So Krishna, as long as I know, you do need to swear that you're gonna protect the country, okay? But there is a specific time range for people who are actually required to serve in the military. And this is gonna be, I'm not sure if it is up to the 40 and something years of age, but I can guarantee the vast majority of foreign citizens who naturalize are not gonna be required to do military service, all right? Just to give you another perspective, even Brazilians who are born abroad, right? Like they are children of Brazilians, when they register with the Brazilian consulate, which in turn is gonna recognize them as fully fledged Brazilian citizens, these Brazilians, at least as of today, they are not required to serve in the military, okay? And even now it's gonna be, not sure if it's a surprise, but it kind of sounds like surprising to me. Even Brazilians in Brazil, most of them, I would assume they are not required to do the military service, right? Because Brazil, if you think it is true, Brazil is a traditionally very pacific a country. Like we do send military across the world. Is more like for United Nations programs, or if there is like a country, Haiti for instance. I know that Brazil sends like military to Haiti very often, okay, but it's more like on humanitarian and peaceful purposes than to fight abroad, all right? So from this perspective, it's kind of easier to understand that not even us, like myself, when I was, when I was like 18 years old, I went to a military installation in São Paulo, and I did show up and I didn't say anything, right? I said, I don't know what's gonna happen, and I was not picked for doing military service. And the reason that they wrote on my profile or my inscription is like that I had flat foot, okay? I don't know, like flat foot, that's the reason. But to receive people to be trained for the military, it does represent a large cost, as you can tell, right? Like you need to receive these people, they need to stay in the military for a year or two. You're gonna need to provide boarding, you're gonna need to provide, like training, clothing, and all types of services you can possibly imagine. So again, Brazil is not gonna actually pick most of the, age qualified males that are actually being subscribed to the military service. All right, Krishna, one more feedback. Let's see, Paul Fonseca. Welcome, Paul. I think Paul has been here before, right, Paul? Let me know if I'm wrong or not. Paul is asking if a Brazilian in the States who don't have a carteira de identificação, RG, can their CPF be used in replace of it? Paul, it depends on the purpose, right? I mean, different applications or different purposes are gonna have different requirements, right? So let me know the type of application you're gonna have. I'm gonna give an example that you're not gonna be able to let's say use your passport in lieu of a RG. And by the way, for those who do not know, the RG is our national ID card. Okay, in the United States, it's very interesting because like usually the driver's license is, and it's on a state basis, but if you ask anyone in the United States, well, can you show me your ID? Guess what? The person is gonna show their driver's license, right? Not in Brazil. Like in Brazil, nowadays it's becoming more common for people to use the driver license, because now the driver license has the national ID number on it. But traditionally in Brazil, we have two IDs. We have the driver license, and then we have this document that is being mentioned by Paul, which is the RG. And the RG is the national ID card. Is issued on the state level, but is recognized throughout the country. Okay, it's called RG. And now Paul's question is like, I don't have the RG. And I would guess Paul doesn't have the driver license as well. And now he's asking if he can use the CPF, which is the Brazilian tax ID number, as a replacement. Can be used in replace of it, right? In place of the RG. So Paul, I can tell you something. I can give you a couple of examples, right? Let's say you are Brazilian and you have a U.S. spouse, and you want to apply for your U.S. spouse to secure permanent residency in Brazil. They are not going to accept just your tax ID alone. You're going to need either the RG or you're going to need the driver license. And the reason for that is because Brazil wants to make sure that you are a resident in Brazil. And the government knows that non-residents, they don't have those documents usually. And that's why the Brazilian government is going to say, well, if you don't have an RG, or if you don't have, an RG nor a driver's license, guess what? I can tell you're not a resident, and therefore I'm not going to give your spouse the residency in Brazil. Okay, so that was an example. Another example, different take on it. It may be for the purchase of real estate. I can tell you that we saw the situation happening in the past, but then there are two potential outcomes. Okay, some registries, they're going to say, well, if you are a Brazilian, I'm not going to allow you to use a passport to buy real estate in Brazil. Because you are Brazilian, you should have one of those two documents. So we saw that happening. Other registries, on the other hand, they said, you know what, you have a valid passport, and a passport is a valid form of identification in Brazil, and you're good to buy real estate. So that's another perspective on your question. Registries in Brazil, they have a lot of discretion on how to enforce the rules. Okay, and that's traditional in the Brazilian legal framework. That's not an exception. That's the rule. There are there are the state rules, right? Like for registries, the registries, they follow both the federal rules, but I would say more closely the state rules, okay? But they still have a discretion because they, like they have an officer who's in charge of their registry, and that officer is there to make decisions given the specific facts in a certain type of situation on how to enforce the requirement. So we do see, and of course, like, different states are going to have more distinct approaches to how they interpret the requirements. But even within the same state, we also see some level of discrepancy in terms of enforcing the requirements, particularly for marriage. All right, marriage in Brazil, there would be, like we would need like several episodes to discuss all the types of things we saw happening in Brazil. But let's just say that marrying in Brazil for a foreign citizen is usually, tough, is usually full of red tape and bureaucracy, and in part because of the difficulty to meet the requirements for most of the registries in Brazil. All right, let's see. Krishna is asking, but isn't the RG for citizens and foreigners use the CR and M? Exactly, that's exactly the case, Krishna. So Brazilians are going to have either the RG or the driver license, and foreign citizens are going to have the CR and NEMA, okay? So I think you, Krishna, you're assuming that Paul is a foreign citizen, and I would guess that Paul may be actually a Brazilian. All right, Paul, let us know if I'm right or not, because yes, if you're asking the RG, I immediately assumed, all right, Paul is probably Brazilian, or maybe not Paul, but Paul's spouse is Brazilian, because Krishna is correct. RGs and driver licenses are for Brazilians, and foreign citizens, instead of getting the traditional RG that we Brazilians have, they are going to get the CRNM. The C, it just means card, right? Like, so we usually say the RNM card. And the RNM card, not surprisingly, looks pretty similar to the RG. So if you have the RG and if you have the RNM, these cards, they are going to look pretty similar. They are not the same, though, because again, the Brazilian authority wants to make a distinction to make it easier for the authorities to know when someone is not a Brazilian citizen. And therefore, there's going to be a distinction between the RNM card and the traditional RG card. Good question, Krishna. And waiting for Paul. Let's see if Paul is going to chime in with an answer. All right. Okay, now is 4:25. We still have some minutes. Heads up to you. We're not gonna have a live stream on Wednesday. I'm gonna be traveling on Wednesday, but we're gonna be back next Sunday. Next Sunday, same time, 3:30 Rio de Janeiro time. So if you have a question that is not being answered or a topic of your interest that is not being discussed today, then you gotta come back here 7 days from now. All right, 7 days from now, it should be the 12th. Am I right? Yes, 12. January the 12th. Okay, let me see if we have any other topics. As usually, thanking you for the likes, thank you for the participation. Krishna says, thank you, sir. Really appreciate it. You're pretty welcome, Krishna. Please come back, to our live streams. Really interesting questions. Okay, one more here. Can I renew my digital nomad visa for a third time? All right, that's a somewhat common question as well. All right, Dragon. Okay, I'll make sure to check in next Sunday. Welcome. Good to see you over here. And regarding this question of the digital nomad, I can tell you that as of today, yes, we have clients being able to get a renewal or an extension for the second time, right? Meaning they got originally the digital nomad, many of them, they applied abroad, so they got a visa. Many applied in Brazil, so they got a residency. And then after this first one, they got a first renewal, okay, first renewal. And then they are getting a renewal for the second time. And the reason for this question is because when you read the original regulation, the original regulation says that the digital nomad visa is available for a renewal. Okay, so the language is somewhat not clear, but we know that when this regulation was approved, there was the expectation that further regulation would address the renewals. So the original regulation just says, listen, you can renew the digital nomad once, okay? And the thing is, like, the digital nomad was put in place by the prior administration. And the new administration, they have no plans for immigration. Like, they didn't do anything for the immigration, right? So they're basically just keeping whatever it was put in place by the prior administration. They're just keep rolling. And because of this state of things, the Brazilian immigration says, you know what, looks good, it's working fine. A lot of foreign citizens in Brazil spending money. We're just going to keep this thing going. Okay, so there is no definite answer to how many times you can renew the digital nomad, because such a regulation was never issued. But we can tell you that the current administration, at least as of today, they are giving you a thumbs up. Listen, you're meeting the requirements, you have the income, you have a clean background check, you work remotely, you're free to stay in Brazil. All right, so I hope that was helpful. And Paul is confirming, like, he's actually American. All right, Paul. And I think we had a consultation, if I recall correctly, Paul. I hope I'm not mistaken, but I think we had a really nice consultation. Now that you're saying that you are American, my wife is Brazilian. What should she do? Right now, I think I recall the specifics. And your case is probably right. I'm not going to enter into the details. We cannot share clients' information. And I can just tell you that if your wife, she's Brazilian, Paul, she should ask for an RG, right? That's the right thing to do, okay? Like, I mean, she doesn't need a driver license in Brazil nowadays. It costs money. People say, it's not me, right? People say that sometimes you even need to bribe, like when you take in the road test. I'm not saying, I hear people saying. And it's a super pain in the neck. Like, you could easily spend a couple of $1,000 just to get your driver license in Brazil, right? So the RG is gonna be by far, Paul, the lowest hanging fruit for your wife. And I'm not sure if she's from São Paulo or Rio de Janeiro, a different state, but I can tell you, Paul, that for every state, there is a portal that your wife can go and check, and she could potentially even start the application for her RG from abroad. And if she's too busy, to find the website, to handle the requirements, our office could potentially help you on a time basis, as long as she's willing to come to Brazil, because RGs, they are not issued by a consulate. Okay, very important for you to understand this distinction. Brazilian consulates, they agree to issue a passport abroad, but never a driver license and never an RG. Okay, so your wife could potentially start the process abroad, as long as in her next trip, she does go, like to the appointment, she has the birth certificate, proof of address, she has the, tax ID, which I'm sure she has. So a bunch of documents, she's gonna schedule an appointment in a certain public department. She's gonna show up, they're gonna take her picture, they're gonna do her fingerprinting, and she's gonna get the RG. All right, Paul. Not listen. Just like everything else in Brazil, some level of red tape and bureaucracy, but not that difficult. All right, Paul. And good to see you over here. We have last question from Karina. That's gonna be the last one for today. Can Brazilians with dual citizenship re-enter Brazil with an expired passport? Thanks. Have a great day. All right. Yes, Karina. Particularly if the Brazilian authority can recognize you through the Brazilian passport. All right. Now, if you have a passport, let's say, I'm not trying to guess your age, Karina, but let's say if you are 30 years old and your passport shows a 4-year-old a girl, then no, you cannot. But if you have a passport that's like 4 years expired or 8 years expired, 98% chance that this is going to work just fine for you. All right, Karina. So again, I want to thank you everyone for showing up today. We're going to be here again next Sunday, 3:30 Rio de Janeiro time. And I hope you guys have a blessed rest of your Sunday.